Throughout this cut content series, we've gone deeply into exploring the many facets of Pokemon Gold and Silver that were left on the cutting room floor. From a lost 1997 build, a 99 build, and many other assets that featured what was basically an entirely different game, including numerous cut Pokemon and a whole different map covering the whole of Japan. But the one element that strings the whole world of Pokemon outside of the Pokemon themselves are its very characters. And yes, this is something that changed massively throughout development. From very early designs of beloved favorites, a completely different lineup of the Elite Four members, and many surprising non-playable characters that you may have never expected to appear. So today on Cut Content, we explore the beta characters of Pokemon Gold and Silver. If you enjoy this video, please hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell too to further support us and keep creating new videos. To start it off, we'll go to one of the earliest cut designs of the game, the protagonist himself, Gold. While the 97 build's version of Gold closely resembled his final sprite, there was one earlier sprite that featured a rather different looking Gold. This one, while having an obvious resemblance, had his hair peeking through the gap in his hat as opposed to underneath, the front pocket being the same color as the rest of his shirt, no back size to his shorts, and on top of that, his attitude looked a lot cockier. I can see why they were going with this idea of a cockier kid, as it would resemble Red's cockier attitude in his art. Though that may be also why they changed it, as they may have wished to differentiate them. We also have what may be his back sprite, which was found in an old screenshot of the game, and this indeed looks like a match considering the white stripes on his sleeves. But this also shows that his hat was intended to be all white, with a circle on the front. However, outside of his original art, one other scrap point on Gold is his original mode of transportation, a skateboard. Found within the 97 build, it would have functioned just like a bicycle. In fact, it seems this quirk even carried over into the Pokemon Adventure manga, where he also had a skateboard. You know, this kid's cockier attitude does look like the type to be using a skateboard after all. But now let's move on to the gym leaders. Many of the gym leaders did exist from the get-go, but some may have been entirely different characters or had their roles changed down the road. All of these being found within the 97 build actually. Let's start with Falkner himself, being there from the get-go as the first gym leader of the beta Old City. His initial design was a lot busier in comparison to his final one, wearing a headband, having a more confident appearance with his yukata tied, and even holding a bird on his shoulder. Which I don't know if that was intended to be a Pokemon or just some generic bird. Might be why he lost it by the final game. And what is this? His right eye? We actually can see it? I mean, when you do compare the overworld sprites too, the final game's bang does cover his eye too, while the original one had a headband instead. Now on to Bugsy? Wow, this is quite a contrast.
You're a third-rate duelist with a fourth-rate deck.
However, like the final Bugsy, his obsession is with bugs, and definitely not dragons. But yeah, this older Bugsy's grand appearance may be the case, as he was supposed to be the gym leader of West City, which was the Goldenrod City of the 97 build. But when relegated to a small town, looking like he runs Kaiba Corp wasn't as suitable to a kid in a village. Next up is Whitney, who apparently didn't have a design yet. In fact, they were using this bug catcher as a temporary sprite back then. She did have one beta sprite later on, but all that's different is her expression. She looks to have been the leader of high tech, considering the female sprite present at the gym, and her appearing early in the list of gym leaders in the data. So skipping past her, we are at Inoki, or you know, Beta Morty. Despite his appearance, we know it's the beta version of Morty, as early concept art of Morty has him listed as Inoki. His design is definitely more the opposite of Falkner's, in that it is a lot simpler compared to the final games, with no headband and wearing white pants as opposed to purple. What I find interesting is that in the remakes of Pokemon Gold and Silver, they appear to have merged the designs actually. It looks like they took Inoki and gave him the headband from Morty, plus a new scarf. Now, it's hard to determine exactly where the gym is, but Birdon is a possibility as it is theorized to be the 4th gym. Now, the 5th gym leader, at least according to the listing, is someone called Okara. While it is easy to assume that this was a scrapped character, especially since they are using a placeholder sprite for him, this is simply Beta Price, as an internal listing that was found referred to Okara as Price. Also, Price takes up the same spot in the final game in the data. The stranger thing, however, is how Price is listed as the 5th gym leader as opposed to 7th if this listing is going somewhat in order. But if Birdon is the 4th gym, logically this would mean that he was the gym leader of the port city of New Type. Now here's Jasmine, and she sure had one hell of a busy sprite back then, covered in a ton of ribbons from head to toe and in what is a different dress. The hair looked very different too. If not for the pose and name, this would definitely be an entirely different character. Though it seems her overworld sprite couldn't capture how busy this version of hers looks. In fact, that final overworld sprite looks a lot busier than this. Considering Blue Forest appears to be next and has a female gym leader, this is likely her, and appears to be a ghost gym. I mean, I guess maybe the way she was dressed has something to do with ghosts? Now, with Price as the 5th gym leader, the original 7th gym leader was Red himself, or labeled as Blue back then, which at the time they hadn't decided on a canon name yet and just gave him the name of whatever was the last Gen 1 game. However, even he had a placeholder sprite design back then, despite his Gen 1 sprite existing. His overworld sprite, however, was the Gen 1 sprite we know. Now, Red is the gym leader of all of Kanto, which was a city on its own back then. Also, one other weird fact is that there exists a sprite within Gold and Silver of Red also skateboarding much as Gold did back then. Not sure what the context of this was, but maybe there was some story-related event where both Gold and Red skateboard together at one point? But all in all, this would mean that the whole Mount Silver battle sure as hell was not happening. Lastly is the gym leader called Gamma. This may very well be a cut character altogether, and even uses a placeholder sprite too. However, Gamma itself seems to be the Japanese name based on Typhon, a large serpent-like creature from Greek mythology. Or you know, a dragon. So Gamma may in fact just be Beta Claire the whole time. Speaking of which, we have not just one, but 2 beta sprites of her. This red one here from the 1999 build, which the color scheme may be done like this to share a color scheme with fellow Dragon Trainer Lance. However, this early one is what is actually interesting. The face is very much Claire down to the expression, but the rest of her looks very childlike. It's possible that this was the Gamma that they were planning her to be before aging her up and making her Claire as we know her. Also, as a bonus for this gym leader section, Janine, the daughter of Koga, also had a different pose originally, resembling her father much more. But the gym leaders were just the start, as the major differences come in the form of the Elite Four. Now, while there is an order that they appear in the data listings, I have doubts as to this being their intended order, as the first one is none other than Giovanni, the leader of Team Rocket, now a part of the Elite Four. Now in the 97 build, Giovanni is shown to be actually reviving Team Rocket himself, as he is found within the radio tower, so this may have been the last battle with him here. While the 97 build doesn't have a new sprite for him as it uses a placeholder, a sprite was found in a later build, showcasing a Giovanni that resembled the original, but now wearing a red shirt as opposed to white. I imagine someone like Giovanni wouldn't be first in this lineup, and more so the last one. If he was the first, that's quite anticlimactic for a Yakuza boss. Now the next 3 all use placeholder sprites of Kurt, the Pokeball maker. Someone you never actually battle, but we'll get to that soon. But next up is Bruno, holding the 2nd spot here as opposed to the 3rd from the final game. Guess he never got a promotion in Gen 1 in that build. The 3rd one is the surprising Misty. As opposed to the final game, which had Koga being promoted to the Elite Four, it seems Misty's anime popularity did it for her here. But the 4th member is interesting, as it is the return of Lorelei. While in the 97 build there was no sprite for her, sprites of her did surface in later builds. 3 different sprites actually. 2 of which are just her standing there menacingly, which are likely the earliest. the other being a pose very similar to Karen, who occupies the same spot later on. And it appears she stayed as part of the Elite Four for quite a while, unlike Giovanni and Misty, before being replaced by Karen. The one problem I see, however, is that if you had both Misty and Lorelei as part of the Elite Four, that's basically 2 water members. I mean, I guess they could have had Lorelei be strictly ice only, but that's easier said than done considering how many of them have a dual water type too. However, by the 1999 build, Lorelei is replaced by Karen, even if she uses the old Lorelei sprite still. Bruno is always here, and Koga finally joins the fray. However, Will is still missing. But aside from the boss characters, there are a lot of differences with the more generic trainers who bully you into a battle, both existing and cut trainer classes. To begin, let's begin with more general ones, such as the Lass and Youngster. The Lass has 2 pieces of beta art. The earliest depicts her in a very different pose of stretching back and with no Pokeball, while the second is very similar to her final art, but with small differences such as the pointed spikes and loose hair, as opposed to the pigtails from the final game. Next is our favorite Youngster that may or may not be Joey and his top tier Rattata. Unlike the Lass, he had just one major design difference, which has him with his arm across him as opposed to sticking out. Then we got the ever popular Beauty. Aside from her hair being different, the pose isn't too off, though she is laying down in a more seductive pose in the beta. If this had survived into the final game, I wonder how localization would have gone considering even the final one got censored with the removal of her wing and making her skirt longer. The hiker also had a pretty simple difference in the beta art, with his arm being behind his head. Nothing too special. But then we get to some of the more wackier differences, such as the Psychic, which while dressed in what appears to be a black yukata in the final game, originally looked like he had something as extreme as a straitjacket. I guess his psychic powers were just that dangerous that he had to be contained. Speaking of extremes, the male and female cool trainers both originally had whips. While the female didn't change too much aside from making her clothes look more sportier and a simple erasure of her whip, the male practically got an entire redesign since his whole personality looked like the whip in the original. Now just your friendly sports dude. But before continuing to the more complex differences, let's quickly go over the more moderate ones. The burglar had a different hat, stripes on his shirt, and basically a different face altogether. The juggler lacked a lot of smaller detail, and his cape was a lot more open originally, looking up almost like he had tossed one of his balls too high. Kimono Girl had her art flipped the other way, and her sash on her back was black instead. The officer also had an early sprite, which had him lacking a baton. Whips bad, but batons are a-okay. The twins had what I'd arguably say is a better sprite, with their heads originally being more proportional. The Pokemaniac had their coat open and hold up! Is that what I think this is? I guess the Pokemaniac may also have been female back then. But who knows? Pixel art! I mean, they also had longer hair then too. The male swimmer also looked more confident in their pose. Arms straight out, looked straight on, but lacked abs. The swimmer female class also had a slightly different art, with her facing straight forwards instead. The school kid, which took me a while to see that the only difference is that their sprite was wider back then. And of course, the medium looked as if her eyeballs were about to pop out of her head after seeing one too many ghost Pokemon, and was more kneeling on one leg as opposed to 2. And yes, she had her prayer beads here, unlike the localized version that censored them out. Her overworld sprite also looked very different, looking more like the actual medium in the game. Odd that they went with the generic Gen 1 design here in the end. Now that we are past the similar looking art, back to the major changes. Starting with the guitarist. It uses a placeholder sprite of blue, even though he was a class in Gen 1 and could have used that old art of his. The original beta was, what is wrong with his face? Was this a placeholder? Well, regardless, it's basically a different character. However, his overworld sprite does appear to be a guy with a mohawk, which means yet another battle sprite we don't have access to may exist for this character. The biker looked quite different originally too, looking way more like a motorcycle gangster, wearing a headband with his bike facing frontward in an intimidating fashion, very ready to battle. Honestly, I would have preferred this version. The oddity is for the overworld sprite of the beta biker. He was wearing a helmet here, something you definitely don't see in the battle art. I guess he took it off before battle. At least he was way more responsible than the Final Games version. Of course, this also could indicate that there was at one point another sprite of him with his helmet on that we don't have access to. The Super Nerd's art has him in a very different pose, all crawled up, almost like he doesn't want to battle, unlike the Final Games version. Then we got the teacher. The Final Games version is a pretty generic teacher, as normal a teacher with a whip would be, but the beta's version, whoo boy, definitely designed a lot more seductively with that pose and tighter clothing. That whip's position also doesn't help either. Seems there definitely was a trend where they toned down sexuality as development went on. Now on to Rocket Grunts. The male one was designed much more like his Gen 1 counterpart to have a whip too. Definitely toned down and now much more ready for a brawl instead. Guess violence was another factor that they toned down with most of these whips disappearing. But the female grunt also had not just one but two beta sprites. The oldest one had short hair. The pose doesn't appear as intimidating like the rocket poses tend to be. So as such, the next one, which clearly influenced Cassidy in the anime with the black clothes and hair, definitely was more standoffish, but in the end, she was even more aggressive and started wearing a white uniform instead. Now beyond the altered trainers, we got a large set of unused trainer classes. Now many of these don't actually have art made for them when they were programmed in, so a lot use placeholder sprites. So starting off, we have the long-awaited return of Professor Oak as a battleable trainer from that scrapped Gen 1 Super Boss battle that seems to have been cut yet again. Which, if interested, you can check out a video I made on that topic a while back. Now another prominent character as a trainer was Kurt, the Pokeball maker. Yes, remember when I showed you his art was being used as a placeholder for a ton of trainers? Yeah, this is why. He was supposed to be battleable and lasted for quite a while too into even the 99 build, with the trainer class even existing in the 99 build, labeled as Ballsmith. But for a truly new class, let's start with the engineer. He had two pieces of art, with the second being slightly taller. Based on the thunderbolt on his helmet, it's pretty obvious that he may have been in the power plant. The big beta power plant in this case that was cut. An interesting class is the Soldier class. Now, considering the 97 build took place all over Japan, and the American military having bases in several places in Japan, I wouldn't be surprised if you were to encounter these close to those real-life locations. Next up is the Sportsman. Just a generic running man really. Had two beta sprites. Oddly, the older one had a Pokeball symbol on his shirt, while the latter removed it. Now, while I did show a beta version of the female teacher, it seems a male teacher was originally planned too, having 3 scrapped sprites at that. The earliest that existed before the 97 build was quite generic, not teacher looking at all. Then poof, a glow up, a confident teacher appearing wearing a tie and also having a whip like the female teacher, before going somewhere in the middle and becoming a nice teacher holding books. All scrapped of course by the end after all that hard work. And now even smaller than the usual school kid class is a fledgling class, looking like a preschooler. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this down the road became the preschool class in later generations. As well, we have the hooligan class, which uses the medium's artwork oddly enough as a placeholder. The overworld sprite exists yet again, which looks like your typical stereotypical delinquent you typically see in many Japanese mediums, down to even having a pompadour. Now on to a set of trainer classes called Garuge Member. This features a male and female variety, but also a third one exists too, which has its own placeholder sprite for maybe another female variety. Now who are the Garuge members? Well, it seems to be based on a popular Japanese nighttime radio show that featured popular guests. I guess these guys might have been intended to appear in the radio tower originally. Then there is this interesting one of a class called Man-Child. I am very curious as to what this guy might have actually looked like, considering the many depictions of a man-child that we see in media. Otherwise, former classes did exist with placeholder art known as Fortune Teller, Kung Fu Master, Prodigy, and Rock Climber. Now the final category, involving characters who are not trainers but do well in linking the world of Pokemon together, or simply didn't because they were either altered or cut. Basically what we call non-playable characters. So let's start off with Agatha. Agatha, as you know, was the third member of the Elite Four in Generation 1, sporting Poison/Ghost type Pokemon. Back in the 97 build, simply appearing as an NPC in the northern town of Blue Forest. What I find interesting is that she is in the same town as the Beta Jasmine, who appears to be the ghost gym leader back then. Maybe Agatha was her mentor, or maybe she even was her grandmother. Next up is the protagonist's mother. Originally, she had a simple design based on her overworld sprite, featuring her hair tied back and in a different dress altogether. While on the topic of family, it appears your rival, Silver, at one point had a sister. I mean, in the 97 build, he wasn't even a thief, but just your neighbor who started out the journey alongside you. So his sister would naturally be there too, but considering he also had a sister like the previous rival, I can see why they changed his role so much. Also, if Silver is Giovanni's son, does this mean we discovered his daughter too? Now regarding a few more side characters, you know that nurse who lets you do linked battles or trades? Well, she had a beta design that had her with black hair and a different outfit altogether. There was also this unique looking character that looked quite tribal and is from the beta South City. A plot with him could have been interesting there. As well, we got this other unique figure labeled as the Western Style Old Man. Whoever he was, I wonder if the Western label was to indicate that this character was supposedly foreign? But then of course we got Imposter Professor Oak. We have covered him prior in his own special video where we went over theories around who he was, which I recommend you watch after this. But to state the basics, it's literally the same character seen from the trading card game's base and rocket sets, which shows how the TCG was tipped off early on plans to include him in the series. In the 97 build of the game, he appears in the city of High Tech, within a house that contains a girl. If you try to talk to him, he doesn't respond, as Game Freak hadn't finished giving him any dialogue or events yet. And as such, he has no text found anywhere in the data, and it's also the only place he appears in this build. Now a really weird one is Imakuni. So this very unique looking sprite is pretty well known to those familiar with the trading card game, the video game and the real trading card game at that. He was some guy dressed in this odd uniform who had a few cards with his face on it and in the video game would try to battle you. The character was actually a Japanese musician by the name of Tomoaki Imakuni, who was brought in to promote the trading card game between 1997 and 2000. And well, he was set to join the main series too, with his overworld sprite found. He was set to actually be a DJ in the Goldenrod radio tower, but eventually moved to the Lavender Town radio tower, and eventually replaced altogether by DJ Lily. But lastly, we got this rather corrupt sheet of NPCs. When these are fixed, they are revealed to be a lot of carryover sprites from Generation 1. Going in order of appearance, you have the female Silphco employee, a middle-aged woman, the lass, Lance, Red's mother, a male Silphco employee, the bug catcher, the Game Boy Kid, Overworld Clefairy, Agatha, Bruno, Lorelei, the surf creature, and Red on a bike. I mean, this may be a sheet made to carry over what they wished to use in Generation 2, with some even getting used like Lance, but a lot were scrapped in the end. The rich characters of Pokemon Gold and Silver are some of the most memorable features of the generation. Some even feel that they are just as important as the Pokemon themselves. While it would have been amazing to see who some of these characters were and how they would have played into the story, what we got in the end was still one of the best casts in the series. But as well, I'd like to thank you all for following this cut content series on Pokemon Gold and Silver. A series with very lengthy pieces of cut content, but at long last covered. Thank you all for watching and enjoying this series. But as usual, Pokemon Cut content is set to continue again soon, with a third generation of Pokemon coming on the horizon. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, a set of games I plan to cover, so hit the subscribe button for I'll plan to be back with more Pokemon Other Games Cut content soon. Hit the like button and comment below on which characters you would have liked to have seen make it into the final game. So everyone, thank you for watching.